Welcome, everyone, to our presentation on Luchesio and Buonadonna, the first lay Franciscans. My name is Greg Colley, and on behalf of the research, writing, and presentation team, I'd like to thank you for being present at our retelling of the story of two of the very first members of the Franciscan Third Order of Penance. During the course of today's presentation, you will see images which are authentic to the time or the place in which Luchesio and Buonadonna lived. The panorama you see on this slide, for example, is Poggibonsi, which is in Tuscany. It is where Luchesio and Buonadonna lived 800 years ago. This presentation is offered under Creative Commons license. You are free to share and adapt this material on the same terms in which we offer it, with attribution for non-commercial purposes. Who were Luchesio and Buonadonna, and how can their 13th century journey towards living a penitential and gospel life guide those of us on the same path centuries later? Today we present an introduction to this wonderful couple and their spiritual journey in their own words as we imagine them based on careful research. This program is a part of our Lay Franciscans project, a series of programs in which we explore how our early lay Franciscan forebears found their particular way to live the call to be a Franciscan in a secular world. In this project, we delve into the lives and times of several lay Franciscans, including Elizabeth of Hungary, Margaret of Cortona, Angela of Foligno, Peter the Comb-maker, and others. Each worked out a singular Franciscan response to the circumstances of their lives that was faithful to the Franciscan charism and the gospel life. Let's begin.
The time is the early 13th century in Italy. Spoken word, visual images, song, and music predominate over written word. The printing press has yet to be invented. Hand-scribed and illuminated books are rare, and Latin is both the written and spoken language of the educated. Most in Italy of the 1200s are illiterate and speaking the different dialects of Italian that are just emerging from vulgar Latin. St. Francis of Assisi's Il Cantito del Creatore, the Canticle of the Creatures, is the first piece of poetry written in vernacular Italian, marking the beginning of Italian literature in the Umbrian school. It is a time of societal change in Italy. The population concentrations shift from country to city. Images of heaven switch from pastoral scenes to those of an urban city, with the reimagining of heaven as a city set on a hill, the New Jerusalem. A system of currency exchange facilitates trade. The rise of the merchant class, into which St. Francis is born, marks the beginning of a middle class between landless peasant and landed noble. With the rise of trade and the city-state also come the possibilities for upward social and economic mobility. As a merchant, one could prosper, and with a little ingenuity and luck and a lot of hard work, one could come to own property and even become wealthy. This is the historical backdrop for our story of Luchesio Modestini and his wife, Buonadonna, two of the first lay Franciscans who joined the movement during St. Francis's lifetime.
I, Luchesio Modestini, grew up in Florence, hearing the clashes of swords and the foreign Sienese tongue of our ruling governor. Like others in Florence, I wanted to take up arms against the foreigners from Siena who ruled us and take back rule over Florence by Florentines. So, as a young man, I became a soldier. After we won back rule of our city, I continued in military service to safeguard our corridors of commerce. I was dashing. I was a daring risk taker, the captain of our young band of soldiers who were always ready to go on the offensive to protect our peace. But then I met my true love, my soulmate. We married, and as we planned for a family, I realized that I could no longer recklessly risk my life now that there were mouths to feed and a family to protect.
Yes, he was dashing in his uniform and quite handsome too. My Luchesio, amore mio, or Lucio, as I called him affectionately. We had 2 sons, and now that we had children, I kept reminding Lucio that fighting and having a loving family did not go together. How would his 2 sons grow up if he died in a skirmish? Over what? Over protecting a dirt road for a wagon full of pots and pans? But finally, he listened and resigned his captaincy. And to keep him from being tempted to go back, we moved. We moved away from Florence to Poggibonsi, where it was quiet and peaceful.
Ah, yes, my love, my beautiful wife, my good woman, my Buonadonna, did finally convince me to give up soldiering. So we moved. Just where the Via Francigena leaves the Val d'Isa and starts to climb upward toward Siena, if you keep close to the narrower fork of the Staggia River, there you will find Poggibonsi. There, my good woman and I settled down with our boys and started a business. I was an entrepreneur, and a very successful one, I might add. I was a merchant to the merchants. I bought, sold, and traded currencies. I made loans. I was greedy for money and often had large amounts of various types of currency in my vault. Naturally, I had to protect my valuables, my money, whether it was German pfennigs or English pennies. Currency was my stock in trade. I constantly thought about how to improve my security, about the way in which thieves might break in, and how I could deter them. I kept watch over everything with the vigilance and tactics of a soldier. I always made sure I extracted every bit of money owed to me. I monitored exchange rates constantly and tirelessly. I was merciless to the letter when collecting debts. Many who could not repay my loans, I sent to debtor's jail. And we were wealthy. My good woman Buonadonna was happy. We could give the boys everything they wanted. We lived in the best neighborhood. We ate the best food. We could afford to be extravagant. Life was good.
Yes, we were greedy. Both of us wanted everything for the 2 boys, everything of the best for them. And as we both thought, that took money, and lots of it. Now looking back, Lucio and I realize how wrong we were. Here Lucio and I were, very successful, with power, influence, and money. But it all meant nothing after the boys died. It was a freak accident. No one was to blame. But suddenly, like candle flames blown out by a random breeze, our boys were gone. It was too late when we realized that they, our boys, our little ones, our angels, were what had given meaning to our lives. That the power, the influence, and money meant nothing without our sons to hold and to love. We were devastated. My poor darling Luchio was lost.
I was in my 30s, in my prime, but without our boys, life no longer had any meaning. In the jolt of a single tragic moment, I discovered the fleeting nature of success and the importance of family and relationship. I could no longer live with myself for tearing families apart by sending fathers to debtor's prison over something that, in the end for me, had lost its meaning. Money meant little. I had to find a way to give back, to repent for the mistakes I had made. In the end, we sold the money exchange business. We kept enough to start a grain distribution business to try to give back to farmers a fair price for their crops.
Perhaps we were like fish swimming upstream. All our friends and business associates thought we were insane to give up a lucrative business to take a gamble at being more fair to farmers. Why, they asked, should we care about sharecroppers? Even a bigger question for them was, why on earth would we want to give them more money, a living wage, and take less for ourselves? But my Luchio would just smile wanly, not saying anything, and go about his business. The boy's death had taken the mischievous glimmer out of his eye and the laughter out of his smile. But it had steeled his determination to live a better life, a more spiritual life that focused on what was truly important in this world and the next.
Yes, the grain exchange business was a success. But for me, it was too much of a success. I was wealthy, but my good woman and I were still very comfortable. I was unsettled. I was disquieted. My conscience still bothered me. How could I sit in my cool counting house while the farmers who were my customers toiled in the heat of the day? How could I take my ease riding to market while my farmers with pulling carts to the market without the benefit of a horse? How could I become rich on their labor while they remained poor every day? Every day I could see the toil it took on their hearts, hardening them so they could steel themselves against a coming cold winter. They might be poor in pocket, but poor in spirit they were not. I longed for a peace and freedom that eluded me. Having money, not having money, in many ways it seemed to make little difference whether one was rich or poor on how well one lived.
I could see it in his eyes, and it hurt my insides. My poor Luchio, my vita mia, my life. My poor little soldier had lost his swagger and his purpose. Without the boys, happiness seemed to elude him. Actually, it eluded both of us. Maybe it was a little easier for me because I could still cook and sew for my Luchio. But Luchio, yes, he provided for me well, but I too longed for a peace and a wholeness that in the absence of our two little loved ones could not be filled. So when Luchio wanted to sell the grain business, I agreed. We did something similar to what we had done with the other business, the sale of the money exchange. We kept enough to buy a little farm and gave away the extra money we did not need. It was freeing to no longer be tied down to maintaining a business, of no longer having to focus one's complete attention and activity on making money each and every day. Tending a homestead farm did take a lot of daily work, but for both of us, it freed our minds to appreciate the beauty of the sunrises and sunsets and the simple comforts of one another's company. It was another step down economically, but though I complained a lot at first, especially about the inconveniences, I got used to it.
My poor good woman struggled at first with farm chores, preparing and feeding slop to the pigs, milking the cow, feeding the hens and collecting the eggs, weeding and watering the vegetable garden. All of this absolutely wore Buonadonna out at the beginning. But I felt invigorated by the labor of tending the crops. The daily toil made me feel stronger and actually a bit younger than I had been feeling for a long time. This was honest work, reaping what I had sown and sowing part of what I had reaped again the next year. It was a cycle of birth and death that I could understand, very much unlike the death of my two sons, for which I could still fathom no purpose. But unlike my former sharecropper customers in the grain business, I owned my land. I was still very blessed and had made it a bit more peace with myself. But then there was news of someone called Francesco from Assisi that actually brought me a glimmer of hope.
My poor Luchio. His hair was a bit gray now that he was in his 40s, but he was still searching for something that our boy's untimely death had taken out of him. Happiness and a real purpose for living. Then we heard that this ill poverello, this little poor man, was coming to town. Actually, coming to our own little town of Poggibonsi. It is in the coming of Francesco de Assisi to our little town that the real story begins for us, and when we really start to live again. This is what I remember of that remarkable day. I knew Francesco's name, but he didn't know mine. I was just another person in the crowd at the piazza where our home village of Poggibonsi was. Everyone in our town decided to come to the piazza to hear from the young, charismatic Francesco that day. And even though we were just another couple amidst the crowd, I felt like he was talking directly to us, just to my poor Luchio and me. We listened, enraptured by his words. His enthusiasm was contagious. He had us singing and dancing. We wanted to hear more. The time in piazza seemed to fly by, and too soon his talk was over. Luchio and I exchanged glances. We knew we had to invite Francesco and his companions over to share an evening meal. We just couldn't let him leave quite yet. There was much more that we needed to ask him. So, emboldened by our need, I took a nervous gulp, marched over to where Francesco stood, surrounded by village dignitaries, and tapped him on the shoulder. Yes, I knew Francesco's name, but he certainly didn't know mine. I, who to this very day am known only by Luchio's nickname for me, the good woman or Buonadonna. I actually took the bold step of inviting Francesco over to dinner, and he accepted.
The first time I heard Francesco speak of radical poverty, a loud clanging cymbal rang in my ears. My heart raced to think of ways to be as free of earthly things, as free as Francesco was. His message hit me squarely in the heart. It was the answer to the way of life we, both my good lady and I, had been seeking for the last decade. I knew I needed to talk to him some more, but I wasn't sure how it could happen. Francesco was surrounded by dignitaries and companions, as well as people in the piazza crowding around to ask him questions. Francesco was starting to move away, beginning to edge his way toward the exit to the piazza, when I saw her, my own Buonadonna, my good woman, who usually prefers to stay in the background, enter the center of the piazza. Buonadonna marched through the crowd as if she were parting the Red Sea before her, and surprisingly, the crowd fell back to let her pass. When she reached Francesco, his back was to her. She reached up her hand as if to tap him on the shoulder, hesitated a moment when she realized what she was about to do, then continued her motion to get his attention. When he turned around, my good woman looked him steadily in the eye, then whispering something into his ear. I could see Francesco nodding a yes. With that, Buonadonna turned on her heel and came marching over to me with a purposeful stare in her eyes. She had a meal to prepare, and I had better get with the program. I caught her in my arms and twirled my good lady around and around in joy. It was as if a dam had broken in my heart. A blockage that had been holding back the grief and hurt had burst free, letting it all wash away. Perhaps with Francesco, we had a chance to be happy again, both of us.
I knew my poor Luchio needed to talk to Francesco. I prepared a meal, a meager and simple meal by the standards by which we used to dine as money exchange merchants. But somehow, it was much more filling and satisfying for both soul and body than any meal we had ever eaten previously. Luchio kept plying Francesco with questions as I kept plates and cups filled for Francesco and his companions. Bursts of laughter would erupt from different sides of the table. The brothers kidded one another mercilessly, and every once in a while, one of them would break into song, whether he could sing or not. The give and take filled our home with a very familiar feeling that I had not felt in a long, long time. It was family.
Yes, I did bombard Francesco with 1,000 questions that evening. Simplifying our lifestyle and livelihood had been an uphill battle with the other merchants and townsfolks who had known us when we had the money exchange business. They were suspicious. I know that we were the talk of Ponjabanzi that day. This is what they were saying. I can just hear them now. Do you remember that money exchange merchant, Luchesio Modestini? Remember when he sold his business and gave away a lot of money? Went into the less lucrative grain distribution business, sold that one, gave away more money, and then settled into homesteading on a farm? Well, we thought he was going to become a fanatic, denouncing the rich, wandering around irresponsibly, wreathed in vague prophecies. But he didn't. We still thought he was crazy to help at the hospital, though, nursing the fevered and vermin-ridden, especially the lepers. Well, guess what? Francesco de Assisi is over at his house having dinner right now, even as we speak. Yes, he snubbed the governor for old Luchesio. Odd. However, what they said didn't matter to me. My good woman could care less. The neighbors could gossip however they wished. We had found something more important and profound. With Francesco and his companions, we found a new beginning and a new family.
It all sounded so wonderful. I had this one nagging thought, though. We were married. We were a couple. How were we to follow Francis? We had heard that Clare of Assisi had run away from home on Palm Sunday to join Francis, and that Francis had not let her roam around with him or the brothers. Rather, Francis took Clare to a convent. What would happen to us? Would we have to go our separate ways? Lucio to follow Francesco through the countryside, and I to a convent? I could not imagine life without Lucio. He was my life. We had been together too many years. We had sons together. We were business partners. We carried each other through our grief when the boys died so unexpectedly. We were to grow old together until death would part us, like it parted us from our sons. How were we to follow in Francesco's footsteps? I was afraid to ask the question. I was even more afraid to hear the answer. What would I do if Lucio wanted to follow Francesco and only do it as a single person? What would happen to me? Could I deny Lucio his opportunity for happiness? Would I ever be happy without my soulmate, Lucio? I wanted to avoid both the question and the answer, but my Lucio knew me too well. He knew that he would have to ask for both of us.
So troubled, my Buonadonna, so troubled over something that would never happen. I would never leave her, but I could tell she was afraid. She was afraid of denying me my happiness and afraid that might mean she would be alone. And she would tell me nothing of her fears because she wanted me to be happy. I had to speak to Francesco for both of us. There had to be a way. Here was Francesco. He had been a soldier like myself. He had been a merchant from a merchant family like myself. Like me, he had grown up with the finer things of life. Like me, he had found little meaning in them. What he had found that gave meaning to his life, I needed to find. But I was married, and there had to be a way for a married couple to live the gospel life also. After all, man and woman, he created them. We were created in pairs. So the next time Francesco came for dinner, Buonadonna served us all, but avoided eye contact with everyone. She dreaded the answer which she knew she would hear. But Francesco guessed what was bothering her. I did ask the question, and his answer surprised both of us. Buonadonna was bustling around the table, filling cups and clearing dishes, but kept looking down. As he began, Francesco gave her a sideways look and burst loudly into a troubadour's love song. Jumping up from the table, he grabbed the dishes from my good lady's hands, whirled her around, and ended the love song with the refrain, "What good will it be to you if I become a monk and you don't keep me as your own? All the joy in the world is ours, lady, if we love each other." And with that, Francesco placed Buonadonna's hands in mine.
I was out of breath, surprised, astonished, and then elated as I started to understand what Francesco meant. Luchio and I never hugged each other so tightly and so happily. I never expected a song in answer to my unasked question. Francesco was creating a new way for us to be penitent, to follow in the footprints of Jesus as husband and wife. He was creating what he called the third order of penance for lay people with families. They call us the first couple to follow Francesco. Francesco later gave Luchio authority to admit new members to the third order of penance. Francesco gave us permission to wear the towel and clothed us both in the habit of the order, belted at the waist with a cord. I did not mind giving up my fancier dresses, my jewelry or silk purses for the towel cross and the coarse habit. Yes, I would still trade an embroidered belt any day for a simple cord to tie around my waist. Wearing a habit freed us with a greater simplicity and a new understanding of what Francesco meant by radical poverty. In the greater family of the third order of penance, we could find our happiness once again together.
Buonadonna and Luchesio spent long and happy lives together as lay Franciscans, though at times they continued to disagree on exactly how to live it out. In one story, a beggar comes to their door asking for bread. Luchesio asks Buonadonna to bring the last of their bread from the pantry. Buonadonna complains that if they give the last piece of bread away, they will not have anything to eat that day. Luchesio insists, and Buonadonna agrees. When she finally opens the pantry door, instead of one small piece of bread, she finds the pantry filled to the brim with loaves of the finest kind. Tradition has it that they both died on the same day within hours of each other on April 28, 1260. According to legend, Buonadonna asked Luchesio to let her die with him. Luchesio prays, and Buonadonna falls ill with a fever and precedes Luchesio in death. Luchesio is buried at Santa Maria de Carmaldo in Poggibonsi, now the Basilica of Saint Lucchese. Buonadonna's remains were carried away in battles between Germany and the Florentines. Because of the many miracles that occurred at his tomb, Luchesio was beatified by Pope Gregory X in 1274. On Luchesio's tomb in Poggibonsi is the following inscription in Latin. The body of Saint Luchesio, who was the first to give his name to the Third Order of Penance of the Seraphic Father in the year 1221. All you who draw near, venerate him. Luchesio's feast day is celebrated on April 28th each year and is a holy day of obligation in Poggibonsi.
This is Greg Colley again. I'd like to thank everyone for joining this presentation on Luchesio and Buonadonna. This program is a part of the Lay Franciscan Project, which is sponsored by Simply Franciscan. We invite you to join us at 10 o'clock, 10 a.m. Pacific time on Saturday, April 29th, when we will offer a prayer service inspired by the lives of Luchesio and Buonadonna. Please note that April 28th is the memorial of Blessed Luchesio, but we're holding the prayer service the next day so that more people can participate. April 29th is the feast day of St. Catherine of Siena, whom we are fairly sure won't mind. Look for announcements about this prayer service in our newsletter. Thanks again for spending time with us. And finally, please stay for a couple more minutes and enjoy one final piece of music by Simon DeVoyle. It's a beautiful duet, and we can imagine Luchesio and Buonadonna singing together.
Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tuae, Iesus. Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae.
Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus. Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tuae, Iesus. Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen.